Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. Let's talk about one of my Booktube Prize Octafinals reads for the translated fiction group, and that is There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko, Tsumura, and translated by Polly Barton from the Japanese. Now, I'm kind of predisposed to really enjoy Japanese literature. I really like very slice of life in the crisp, minimalist style that is common in Japanese literature. So this was definitely enjoyable from that front for me because it really fits in there. This one follows a contemporary setting. It's a young woman in her 30s, and I don't think we ever actually get her name, interestingly, but she has quit her previous job due to burnout, and she talks about that a little bit here. So far, the only person who'd offered me straightforward sympathy about the inappropriate relationship I'd formed with my work was Mrs. Masakato. I should probably have talked to my friends about it, but they were almost all of a similar age to me and were also just gritting their teeth and clinging on as best they could, so it hardly felt right to drone on about my problems. Besides, I didn't want to worry them. I had one friend who was currently enduring a situation even worse than the one I'd encountered in my old workplace. Whereas I'd ended up quitting with burnout syndrome, she was still hanging on in there. Even in the past, when my friends had been kind enough to say that what I was going through sounded tough, I'd always felt morally indebted to them in some way, because what they were going through was, in point of fact, tougher. In contrast, the sympathy I got here may have been superficial, but at least it came without fetters, and thus it felt easy to accept. So we have this character who has gone through really difficult times in her job and has burned out. She has quit that job and moved back in with her parents to kind of rest and recuperate. And so she has sought out this recruiter in order to look for a new job. And she has very specific demands about this new job. She wants it to be both physically and mentally easy. She wants it to be very close to her home. So she's really looking for something very low demand. A job counting the number of sparrows sitting on telegraph cables or the number of red cars passing through a crossing. I felt like if I listed those kind of examples, it would seem like I was joking, so I kept quiet, but in truth I was semi-serious. I wanted a job that was practically without substance, a job that sat on the borderline between being a job and not. The sort of job where there was no chance of a genteel old lady with more time on her hands than she knew how to deal with showing up out of the blue and saying, "You look so tired," and "We're counting on you." Above anything else, I wanted a job I could do alone. I knew that I'd need to leave that stipulation behind me at some point, but at least for the moment, that was how I felt. So she's got very specific requirements about this job. She really wants a low effort job. And so this book is structured in 5 parts, and each of those parts is a job. I definitely saw some criticisms that people said this is more a collection of short stories, and I really disagree with that there's a very clear through line here that even though it's split up into different parts, each part really begins with her going to see this recruiter and then starting a new job and either ending the contract due to the job finishing or deciding she doesn't want to continue at that job and then going back to the recruiter. So she goes through these 5 jobs. So the first one, she is monitoring this man in his home. It's a very odd situation, and each of these jobs has definite quirks to it that makes this such a delight to read. So he has some clandestine item that he maybe doesn't even know he has, but the company that has hired her wants to get to it before he does, basically. So she is monitoring him at all times, essentially. And she finds that the people who work there are really caught up in the people they're watching. She gets to know little things about this guy that she's monitoring and begins to see mirrors of her own life in him, really. So it becomes this odd situation where she has this connection with someone she's never met, and her expertise from watching him for a certain time really helps her execute the job. So that's the first job. Then she moves into this job doing bus ads. They're audio ads, so she's writing scripts and getting them recorded and edited, and these are keeping the buses up and running, basically. They're the only way they can pay to keep these buses running. And the ads are showing her new shops and restaurants in the neighborhood that she never would have seen before, and she gets very connected with her coworkers. And so she starts to feel a sense of responsibility to her coworkers, even though, this is meant to be an easy job. The next one that she goes to is writing trivia for the back of cracker packets. And this one I think was the most fun for me. She takes it so seriously and really wants to have the right themes for her trivia. She really wants to impress people and get across interesting facts. So after that job, she moves on to a position putting up posters, and that sounds like a pretty mundane job, right? There can't be any drama doing posters, right? Obviously it's a little bit more physical than the other jobs that she was doing because she's gonna have to walk around and do posters, but in fact she has to get involved in convincing people to allow her to put up the posters and cover up posters that are there. There is some competition with a different group that is putting up posters that creates some drama in her job, despite the fact that this should clearly be a very mundane job. And then the final job is an outdoor job. She is sitting in a remote hut in a park, basically, and just kind of monitoring it. Occasionally, she's meant to wander around and clean up and do mapping of the area so that they have accurate maps. And that's about it. So she spends her whole day in this hut. She has lunch in her day, and that's really all there is to it. So exactly the sort of mundane job that she is looking for, really. So through all of these jobs, you can see how much she gets invested in the job and how much pressure she puts on herself to be really excellent at her job, even in these incredibly low stakes, mundane jobs. So there's some mild speculative element to this. It is barely there, I would say, or even to the point you could doubt that there's anything speculative in this. But I choose to read it as being slightly speculative in one of the stories, really. So I enjoyed that element. I kind of wish that had been pushed even further because that really added to the quirkiness of what was going on, because you're like, is this really happening? And then we just kind of move on. I think this was a little bit mischaracterized because on the blurb and in the synopsis, it mentions this being unsettling. And this is not unsettling at all, I don't think. It's very quirky. There are moments maybe where there's kind of something suspicious going on, but nothing really unsettling. This is very comfortable and cozy, relaxing, slice of lifey reading. So for me, this was just an absolute delight to read. I really enjoyed the whole experience, start to finish, of this. So let's get into some spoilery thoughts briefly, because I can't really talk about how I thought of this without discussing the way that it comes into a conclusion at the end. So the spoiler is that in conclusion, after these 5 jobs, she realizes that she does put all this pressure on herself, and really life is full of these ups and downs and these difficulties of your job. Many of her coworkers through these jobs were overworking themselves or really putting pressure on themselves as well. So it wasn't just limited to her, it was something systemic. And so she comes to this realization of going back to her old job where she experienced burnout, because it's all about there being good people everywhere you go, and realizing that there are difficulties in every job. So I don't know if I should take that as a satirical outcome, and that it's kind of making fun of these sort of trite pro-work attitudes, but I didn't really feel that sense that it was actually doing that. I read it as more serious, that this is about her realizing that it's really about her attitude in going into the job and not the job's fault that she was overworked and burnt out. And I just don't really agree with that. So for me, the conclusion was completely disparate from the initial story. And I was actually expecting something more like a Korean story that I read last year, The Cabinet by Eun-soo Kim. And in that one, that is about a man who is doing this incredibly mundane job. He's just sitting at a desk beside a cabinet, basically. And in the same way, he becomes overwhelmed by the fact that he has this really mundane job. So it has that, but then in that story, it is extremely critical of work and workplace culture in a way that this one is not, with the conclusion especially, where really it is definitely the fault of sociocultural cultural attitudes that she has this pressure about work and that she can't maintain a work-life balance in any way. And even the term work-life balance is riddled with just problems. So I felt like this didn't go far enough into that element or a critique of that, and almost seemed very pro-work. So I don't know how I feel about that. So that's overall my thoughts and the kind of spoilery discussion on this. I really enjoyed this, though, as a pure book reading experience. I loved and enjoyed every minute of this, cover to cover. So yeah, that is There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Tsumura. Thanks so much for watching.